Hello, and welcome back to Season 7 of the MRX Lab podcast, the show from FlexMR, where this year we're on a mission to share inspiring stories, tips and tricks to help you put customer salience at the heart of your business. To help me do that, I'm thrilled to be joined today by Natalie Delahunty of Trainline. So welcome, Natalie. Thank you for joining us. To kick us off, do you want to tell me just something about customer centricity and what it might mean to you?
Sure. Hi, Paul. Thanks. Great to be here. Customer centricity for me is about being the voice of the customer at the table. So it's about understanding the customer, what are their needs, what are their motivations, what are their barriers to using your brand. And I think sometimes it's really easy within businesses to end up down a rabbit hole chasing these internal metrics, these internal KPIs. But it's really important to, come up for air, look around. What are your customers doing? What are they not doing? Why are they using your brand? Why are they not using your brand? Kind of as a level set to remind yourself, okay, as a business, who are we? What is our purpose? What is our proposition? What are we offering to people? And then once everyone's aligned on that, then you can go back down your rabbit hole.
And how easy do you think that is for people in a business to think like that? They've all got their day jobs, they've got tasks, they've got targets, got commercials, financials, all of those things in our minds. Obviously for us in customer insight and marketing, we're thinking about customers, but how likely do you think it is that people around the business are remembering that?
It's difficult, right? Because as you say, everyone's got their own targets and businesses need these short-term sales targets, right? They've got investors to please, they've got shareholders. So it's not saying that those metrics aren't important. It's saying that these are important short term, but longer term, you need to think further ahead about the health of the business overall. And as our role as like a customer insight team, it's about bringing that voice of that customer in front of people and kind of making them see, making them take a step back, a pause from their nitty gritty sort of day-to-day activities, and just getting them just to think for a moment about what's outside of the office, outside of, in our case, the Trainline bubble. And just see what are people doing, what are they saying, and how things have changed since we last sort of had that customer view.
Okay, that's a good answer. That's good. I like the Trainline bubble. I think all businesses are in danger of being in that bubble if we're not careful. And do you think that's a key part of your role as customer insight, to sort of try and get into that bubble? Yeah,
100%. I think especially as train usage, train behaviour is quite different regionally. It depends where you live, where you're travelling to, if you're travelling into a big city, out of a big city. And so our headquarters is in London. So a lot of people are commuting into and out of London and they will have a certain behaviour. But that's not to say that someone in Newcastle or someone in York or someone who lives in the countryside is going to have that same behaviour, right? And there's always a risk of kind of assuming that other people have the same habits as you do. But I think part of our role is to sort of show sort of nationally what the behaviours are and how they differ, and kind of helping people recognise that they might be part of this segment of people, which might be one segment of 6 different types of behaviours, whereas the people they would surround themselves with daily would be all in that same segment. So it's raising awareness of the different types of people who we are appealing to. We're a nationwide company. We also operate abroad in different markets. So it's about understanding how different people in different regions, in different geographies, who use the train for different purposes, all have sort of different behaviours and different needs from us as a business.
Okay. Do you have, if I asked you for an example of how you might go about that, is the one that stands out where you've managed to use insight as a way of changing someone's thinking or influenced a decision and changed a decision?
Yeah, so we're really fortunate at Trainline in that the leadership and exec team are really open to research. They're really happy to engage with it. And so we've done a few projects in the past whereby we've managed to show what the needs of customers are, and we've managed to use that to implement some kind of strategic decision in the business. So, for example, we ran a project called Project Hook, which is essentially understanding switching behaviour. So how can we drive new customer growth? So new customer growth, it's a language that's very suitable for the business side, the execs, the leaders. But for us, what we're really trying to understand is what do people need and what do people want? and how can we build a proposition around that. So we did a MaxDiff, which I call it a MaxDiff on steroids. It was kind of a simple MaxDiff, but there was a few additional layers on top. So what we wanted to get to, and the crux of the project was, we know that this set of, it might be features, or it might be marketing messages, or it might be promises as a brand. We know these things are important to people, but what's important enough to get them to switch and to use Trainline? And the outputs were really useful because a whole months and months of work went into it, a lot of statistics behind the scenes. But the key output was just one chart, one hierarchy. Mm-hmm. But the main thing for me wasn't necessarily the individual features or the individual messages that performed best. It was more about the themes and what came out of that. So one of the themes that came out was around disruptions. So no one likes being disrupted on the train. No one likes delays. And we as Trainline, we don't own trains, so we can't control when the trains are delayed. But the fact that this featured so highly and it was so important to people, and it was a need that they were looking for from a train brand, it sort of encouraged the business to say, okay, well, what can we do around delays? Like, how can we help people? How can we make that moment easier? Even if we can't control it, we can't stop it, but there are things that we can do to help. And so last month, we launched 4 new features. It was one of Trainline's biggest product updates. And yeah, so a lot of the research went into what that might look like. How do we share that through marketing? And yeah, it was a really good sort of development for Trainline.
I'm sitting here wanting to know the features now because I use Trainline and we have disruptions regularly. So I'm sitting here wanting to know the features and what you've added, which I think is a really good example. I think it's also interesting that you went to MaxDiff as well. I mean, it scares me, I'll be honest. But again, when we're talking about customer and influence, obviously the output was quite simple, and yes, there's a lot of statistics and a lot of complexity behind that kind of work. But I get what you're telling us is the output was fairly simple, minimal, I think.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the reasons why I think it was quite successful, is because we at Trainline, I'm sure many organisations are, but we use Slack, right, for a lot of things. And so I always say to my team, like, if you want a piece of work that you've done to get noticed, it needs to be something that's visual, mm-hmm. and that's just on one image, one infographic or one slide that you can take a screenshot of, and then you can put the screenshot on Slack. So then it's easier for people to see it without having to open links to a PowerPoint document, request permissions to access, and then have to scroll through 70 slides or whatever. It's just one visual that they don't have to open. It's already there in front of them. And if it's interesting, they can share it to other people. And then from that, you can sort of gauge the interest in it, and you can put sessions in to go into things deeper. But I think that's just a really good way of like getting people interested and getting people to engage in your work.
I love that. I love that you've just simply created almost a rule or a habit or a ritual to force that to happen as well. Did they always go to Slack then as a way of starting that process?
Most of the time, I'd say yes. It's something we're still trying to improve on. Like we're so lucky that we've got so many tools, so many resources in research. And one of our challenges is getting it out and sharing. So that's something we're trying to do a lot more frequently, is just give like regular updates, regular snippets, as opposed to putting, an hour in people's diaries when they're already busy and they might not know exactly what it is you're going to share. So it's like, okay, if you can pique people's interest earlier, and then you can put the time slot in, so then they know what to expect and they can see that there's something they can learn from it.
Again, I think that's when you've hit upon 2 things there for me. One, that not the problem, the challenge, which is how do you get insight out there, in your words, how you socialize it mm-hmm. across the business. And 2, that sort of the snippet element, that regularity, I guess, the ease of making that possible. Are there any other ideas for sharing that make that? Do you do that regularly? Are there regular slots for that, or is it just when there's insight, we'll share a snippet?
Yeah, it's pretty ad hoc. It's whenever we find something that we think will be insightful, useful to the business, that's on trend, that's in response to something that's happening in industry, for example. But I guess another thing that we try and do, and this really helps with getting people to remember the projects that you're working on and to mention it when you're not in the room, but they might be in a room somewhere, is to give projects an interesting name. So instead of calling something a segmentation when you've got 20 segmentations in a business, or calling something a MaxDiff or a conjoint, and people are like, well, what's that? We'll try and give them interesting names like the Project Hook, something that people can remember. It piques people's interest, and it means that it's just more memorable. So when people are in a room, a lot of times they'll refer to Project Hook or refer to hooks, and it kind of integrates itself into the language of a business. So that's worked really well. But I would say not to do that with every project, otherwise you'll end up with hundreds of random names of different projects flying around. It will be a bit confusing. But for the high-ticket, high-stakes projects, I think it works really well.
Yeah, it does. I was thinking it was, and when you said not for everyone, I was thinking, why not? But you'd end up with an index of all these terms. Which one is it? But again, I think that's brilliant. When you said when you're not in the room, when we talk about customer salience, it is about memory. It's about memory structure. That's the key thing, because you're not going to be in the room all the time. The customer is not in the room. So how do we create a memory structure so that people around the business, when they're making decisions, can easily recall the customer in that memorable way? And I think that's a good way of doing it. It gives little signposts, I guess, to projects and insights in there. Again, continue on that same theme. Is there a type of work that the business maybe always asks for, but maybe you think doesn't respond to? So I'm thinking here quantitative, qualitative kind of discussion, because a lot of businesses run on financial. It creates a habit of statistics, data, numbers. Do you see that as well in Trainline? Yeah,
100%. I think it depends who the stakeholders are. If you're going into a room and, like you say, you're in a room with finance people and like commercial people, and they've got backgrounds in economics and maths and like numbers stuff, their language is numbers, right? So whether you've started and you found an insight through a qual piece of research, it's like, okay, how do you translate that into their own language? How do you turn that into a number? How do you then say what that number means? Like, what does it represent? What's the impact on the business? So instead of just going into a room and saying, oh, well, 20% of people think X, Y, Z, it's kind of like, well, like, what does that mean, But that 20% of people has this impact on the business, and they are worth that much, and this is what we should do about it, and that's how much it will cost. It's kind of taking your insight, translating it into whatever language your stakeholder uses, and making it a really easy journey for them to know what to do with it. Mm-hmm. So I often say about research nowadays, it's about having your foot in many different pies, right? It's about, you need to be part commercial financial analyst, you need to be part marketer, you need to be part product developer, you need to be part growth manager. And it's about, understanding each of these different teams, how they work, what their language is, and how you can sort of integrate into each of them.
Again, I think that's a really good point. I mean, you've hit two things again there. I've got a question later on, which is about skills and skills of insight people going forward, which I think is a wonderful topic in itself, and you've expanded on that. But also that translation of language around the business, which I think is a skill in itself. How much time, or do you think we spend enough time, maybe is the question, thinking about that, thinking about the audiences within a business as a customer insight? Do you see that in your team as something that they do? Is it something that we think we need to do more of? Sort of planning almost how we approach audiences.
I think it's one of the most important things that, as like a client-side researcher, we need to be able to do. And it's difficult. It's not easy. It comes with experience. It comes with talking to people in different fields within your organisation. But it's definitely something that we need to learn and we need to get better at, especially in climates when budgets are being restricted and squashed everywhere. It's like, okay, how can we as a research function, how can we show our value? How can we show the potential impact that we have? And it's more tricky for us, right? And so I think translating our insights into what it means for the business and how it impacts things and how it can change the trajectory of a business and how it can impact the strategy, I think is key. Otherwise, I'd worry that like the chief, whoever it is just going to look at it and be like, okay, well, that's interesting, but so what?
So what?
It doesn't help my business.
I wonder how important it is as an insight function to think more like marketing. So marketing, we think about target audiences all the time. We think about who the target audience is for a product, who the target audience is for a brand, and what their needs are. Is that? And I wonder whether we as an insight function should be trying to do that more internally with our stakeholders and our decision makers, almost thinking about them as a target audience and their needs and whether they're different. Do you think that's something we need to do more of?
Yeah, definitely. I think depending on who that stakeholder is, it means that we need to tailor how we're delivering our insights to them. So whether it's like a qual video vox pops, that might suit a particular type of person. It might suit someone who's in more like the creative part of marketing. Or you might have some like heavy numbers and statistics, which would go down a lot better with somebody else, for example. So yeah, it's about understanding who your stakeholders are and what makes their decisions a lot easier to make. Because at the end of the day, they're taking all this research and they're making a decision. So if they're having to take something, interpret it, figure out what it means, it's going to be more difficult for them to see how is this going to help me with my decision. So if you kind of guide them and make that decision for them, I think we'll be a lot more sort of effective as research teams.
Yeah. Again, it comes back to the skill set, though, doesn't it?
Yeah.
I mean, skill set of insight people. And what do you think the skills going forward? What are the key skills that you think we need to develop more of, or lean into more than we have done in the past?
It's an interesting question because, and I've been thinking about this for a while. Like my boss asked me the other day, "Where do you see yourself in 10 years' time?" I'm like, okay, that's quite a long time, and I have no idea. And when I think about research people, and I try and look at where they're going and what roles they end up in towards like the later stages of their career, it's quite difficult to see where they are. I can't really see where they go. So I think a lot of people might go research agency, and they might sort of climb that ladder and be like running a market research company. But people who are client side, there tends to be not a ceiling as such, but it's kind of you get to an insight director. There might be like a insight customer VP potentially, but that's kind of it. Whereas I feel like the skills that we have as researchers and the skills that we're developing to be a successful researcher today, so like I said earlier about having some knowledge on finance and marketing and product and all these different skills, combined with, and this is a generalization, but combined with the researcher skill set of being very analytical, being quite critical, and just being able to sort of really understand objectively like what's right or wrong answer without having sort of any sort of bias and that kind of thing. I think that puts researchers in a really good stead to be leaders of organizations, whereas typically, and I don't know why they're not. I don't know why you don't see like a chief commercial officer coming from a research background, or you don't see a CEO coming from a research background. They tend to come from marketing or finance, right? But I definitely think that researchers have the skills and have the potential to get to those sorts of roles.
I think it's a fantastic point. I mean, it really is when you think about it like that. The core skill as a researcher in an insight function, traditionally in core now, is still critical thinking. It's still the ability to be inquisitive, to be able to analyze data, to be able to translate what it means. I think the things you've already raised there about commercial, finance, growth, those things matter today more than they did because it's about how you communicate, as we said, to the rest of the business. I think the other things you've pointed out there about how you summarize data, how you pique interest, how you influence people, they then become more important for us going forward. But they're all transferable skills to be that chief commercial officer. Yeah. I mean, that is a solid grounding for that. And yet we almost get stuck or typecast into insight, critical thinking, inward thinking. It's a different way of thinking somehow.
Yeah, exactly. And I think it comes from how insight used to be seen in the past, where it's more of a support function, right? So you'd have a briefing form, you'd have tickets and that kind of thing. It's like the research team is there to help me. Whereas now I think we're seeing a shift where research teams are being seen as someone who can guide, who can help form those strategic decisions, who can input earlier than just being like a retrospective, oh, we've decided this, can you go do some research to prove my point? So I think the role of research is changing. I think it's becoming more important in businesses. And so hopefully in the next 10 years, we'll see more and more researchers sort of take those leadership positions.
Again, I mean, really good. You've just reframed insight as well in there with that answer. We've moved away from the commercial officer there, but because I'm interested in that reframe you've just done from that briefing form, that project life cycle, that request reactive way. How would you describe it now if it's not reactive projects? What do you think? I mean, guide is a great way, but how else would you describe it?
I would say having that proactivity and being able to, like we're saying about having conversations with different parts of the business, it means that you're able to spot those opportunities. So if someone doesn't realise that research can solve a problem, if you're in that conversation, you can spot the gap and you can fill it, rather than waiting for someone to recognise what that gap is and think, okay, research could help me here. So there's going to be sort of gaps missing when you look at it that way. But by being proactive and just by being in the room and just by talking to people and by understanding how businesses work, how decisions are made, you can sort of spot how insight can help further the business and how you can input into making those decisions rather than just sort of, like you say, just reacting.
But that's a big challenge, isn't it? That's a big challenge. I mean, you're now talking about a function that is not support or being requested. It's present all the time. You can't be in every room.
Yeah.
So how do we do that? How do we sort of, obviously Slack and things like that? You've raised snippets, and are there other things you maybe think we should be trying to do more of or change the way the business thinks about us potentially to be less reactive and less support function and be more in the room, omnipresent almost?
Yeah, and it's difficult, right? It's a cultural shift essentially. One thing that I did, so when I joined Trainline nearly 4 years ago, I was the only one on the commercial side of the business. And I think I said to myself within my first sort of 6 months, I was like, okay, what I could do is I could create a briefing form, and then that would help people to come to me with questions. And I was like, you know what, I'm not going to do that, because that sort of puts across that message that you are that support, which you are. But if you're going to get bogged down with requests, you don't have any time to think ahead and to think more proactively. And we still today, we're a team, we've got 3 at the moment on the commercial side, and there's about 8 on the product UX side. And still today on the commercial side, our team, we don't have that briefing form still. So we do respond to requests. It's not as though people ask us a question, we ignore them. No. But I'd say it's about 20% reactive, 80% future. And we've managed to make that work. We've managed to take people on the process with us. So if we have a project in mind, we'll just start working on it. We won't wait for permission as such. We'll say, okay, this is what we want to do. So let's get going. Let's just do it. And as we go along, we'll bring the relevant stakeholders in, say, look, this is what we're doing. This is what we're going to do next. What do you think? And then most of the time it's like, oh, yeah, great. That sounds good. And then I think that gives us kind of the space to keep doing that. So once we've done a few projects of that type, then that becomes your role in the business. You're sort of not seen as that reactive team anymore. You're seen as that sort of trends, that future thinking, that sort of strategic team in the business. Yes,
and the guide in that sense.
Exactly.
If people are looking for answers, then they're naturally going to come to you as a guide. The form is almost not irrelevant, but it's implicit almost in that thing. Where do you think, from insight functions and as a sort of sector, what do you think? What's the big challenges that we face going forward?
I think there's a few challenges. One, which is at the most exciting, but it's cost. Research is expensive. And I think budgets are being squeezed left, right and centre. Research is an obvious one to take budget from and invest it somewhere else. And I think what that means is that if my budgets are cut in half, for example, and then I have to think about, okay, where is that going to come from? To me, it's not going to come from people, because I need the people. I need them to find the data and the insights somewhere else, and just potentially not from a panel or an agency. So I think that's the thing. I think cost if we can bring the cost down but maintaining the quality. And I don't know if those two letters come into it around here, but I think the industry needs to find a solution to that.
Yeah, I think, again, real challenges there. Cost is at the heart of a lot of it.
Yeah.
But I think from a client side, you're bringing that perspective that really is people. If you cut the people, you cut the guide, you cut the influence,
exactly.
You cut all of those things that we've talked about, the communication skills in there. So finally, if there's one question before we end, what's one thing that you'd like the listeners to take away from today's episode? Maybe out of all things we've said, or maybe something we've not covered at all. But if you could summarize into one thing, what would it be?
I'd say I'd encourage us researchers to be bold, to challenge decisions in a business, to bring that customer voice to the table. But I would say make sure that you're talking the right language beforehand. To
be bold.
Yeah.
I like that. So there we go. We have to be bold. That's Natalie Delahunty of Trainline telling us to be bold. That's a great note to end on. And thank you, the audience, for tuning in. We may be out of time today, but I'll be back next month with another episode and more inspiring stories of customer insight and customer salience. Until then, I've been your host, Paul Hudson, and this has been MRX Lab.